Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites and Israel's fresh attacks on Iran's escalated tensions. Iran's foreign minister will meet Putin Monday as per his talks in Istanbul. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister Modi calls for de-escalation according to media reports. Ukraine's army chief Oleksandr Syrskyi has said that 10,000 Russian troops are fighting in Kursk region, where Ukraine holds 90 square kilometers to block reinforcements to Donetsk. Meanwhile, Kyiv claims $10.8 billion damage to Russia's industry, while strikes killed 2 in Donetsk and North Ukraine, as well as Moscow claims new gains near Kupiansk, according to media reports. UK says it was informed but not involved in the US strikes on Iran as Gulf states including Bahrain and Kuwait prepare now for conflict spread. Investors now brace for oil surge. This may fuel inflation, while Trump claims success and Tehran vows consequences, according to reports. Iraq has warned that US strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities pose a great threat to Middle East peace and regional stability. Iraqi government spokesperson Basim Alawadi confirmed that additional US embassy staffs were evacuated from Iraq amid rising regional tensions, according to US officials. Bahrain ordered 70% of government staffs to work from home after US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, citing regional circumstances, while Qatar has warned of catastrophic consequences and urged restraint, according to Qatar's foreign ministry statement. Japan has reported Chinese vessels near disputed East China Sea islets for a record 216 straight days. Meanwhile, South Korean Trade Minister Yeo Han-koo, South Korea's minister, has to raise U.S. chip curbs concerns in Washington, according to media reports. India's counter-terrorism agency arrested 2 men in Kashmir for allegedly harboring Pakistani gunmen involved in last month's deadly attack on civilians in Pahalgam, India, according to media reports. UK to unveil a 10-year multi-billion-pound industrial strategy next week, with over £1.5 billion pledged, according to reports. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's plan for change includes a £275 million skills investment and a new industrial strategy council to monitor its delivery. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has launched a fiery condemnation of the US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, calling them a betrayal of diplomacy and a violation of the UN Charter. Speaking from Istanbul, Araghchi said the attack was based on false claims and accused President Trump of crossing a very big red line. He warned that Iran will respond based on our rights and defend its sovereignty, while also demanding an emergency UN Security Council meeting. Meanwhile, Iran's Revolutionary Guard issued a sharp warning, saying the US cannot escape a severe response and that American bases in the region are now points of vulnerability. The IAEA has confirmed 10 buildings were damaged at the Isfahan nuclear site, including a fuel rod facility, but says radioactive materials remains contained. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion, Dr. Punsara Amarasinghe. He's a lecturer in Sir John Kotelawar Defense University, live from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. With the IAEA now calling for an emergency meeting, and also Araghchi asking for a meeting with the United Nations. Do you think the US strikes have undermined the agency's ability to monitor Iran's nuclear program, or was the IAEA and UN already being sidelined by both sides?
I think think they were sidelined by the both sides because that was quite a nominal approach. First and foremost, we need to understand what is going on in the aftermath of the US strike in Fordow and Isfahan nuclear facilities. The Iranian regime has vowed to retaliate, which will simply lead to unmitigated disaster and everlasting consequences. This seems to be a polemic. This seems to be quite a rhetorical statement coming from Tehran, because we have to fathom the realistic ground what Iran faces at the moment. On the ground reality, its options are quite limited because its air superiority has been debilitated compared to the American B-2s and the F-35 aircrafts, the fighter jets used by Israel and Americans. Iranians are being stuck with F-14, quite old generation two-engine aircrafts, which cannot penetrate the skies of Israel. At the same time, the last week, even before Donald Trump officially announced the attack on Fordow and Isfahan nuclear facilities, United States Navy, they deployed their largest, most sophisticated aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford in the Mediterranean Sea, symbolizing that America is ready for any kind of a retaliation, followed by two destroyers from the American Navy. So at the same time, so if you just look at the development for the past 24 hours since the American strike in Fordow, the Iranian ballistic missiles targeted at Israel have been brought down up to 13 to 20 compared to what it witnessed last week. So since Israeli attacked Iran on last Friday, the Iranians retaliated at a larger ratio by firing 100 ballistic missiles per day. But for past 24 hours, it has been reduced up to 20 to 15, which is clearly signifying that the realistic Iranian retaliatory power is extremely limited. So these are the ground realities which we are seeing from the Middle East at the moment. And as for the question that you raised, I think those two institutions are being completely sided by the both sides.
And building on that, what are the lessons or warning does this crisis hold for Southeast Asia, such as Sri Lanka, India, a region with strategic US interests and fragile balances?
Yeah, I think we need to maintain a strategic ambiguity concerning Indian factor, the subcontinent. We have to realize that New Delhi maintains quite a good rapport with both Tehran and Washington, D.C., because last month I was present in Raisina Dialogue hosted by your Foreign Ministry along with the Observer Research Foundation, which witnessed the coming of the strategic leaders like Tulsi Gabbard and all these American the diplomats. At the same time, it welcomed Iranian strategists as well. So, which signifies that India is playing a very crucial game in the region. So, from an academic point of view, I think the important moral lesson that we need to adopt from this escalation is the fact that countries such as India or maybe even Sri Lanka, even when it comes to Singapore, it is better to maintain a strategic ambiguity. The strategic ambiguity in international affairs refers to the situation where you should not publicly acknowledge or you should not openly support either party. Maintain a completely silent policy, right? As how Americans were responding to the rise of the German imperialism right before the First World War. That has to be the that has to be the lesson that we need to absorb from these escalation which is going on before our eyes.
And now looking at the broader effects of this, could this escalation affect US's credibility or influence in Asia, especially among countries that value stability over force?
I think, yes, to a certain extent, this can undermine the American influence upon Asia, in particular West Asia, especially if you look at how US dealt with the Houthi last May. The Houthi and the US came to a kind of a standhold point. At the same time, before this escalation began, as exactly how the Iranian foreign minister acknowledged that Americans have betrayed us. Well, because Washington and Tehran, they involved themselves in an unofficial manner, right behind the closed doors, that they would go for some kind of a nuclear negotiation. So, but the transparency, this credibility has been sabotaged by the sudden reversal of the events in the Middle East. And at the same time, we should not forget the fact that the geopolitical and longer-term economic impact that it can arise out of this escalation can be severe for many nations in South Asia as well. Imagine that if what will happen if Tehran decides to close down the Strait of Hormuz, right, at the worst point of this escalation. The Strait of Hormuz in the Gulf, the Bay of Gulf, is a crucial destination because it allows 20% of the oil transportation per day. And if it gets closed by the Iranian regime, if Iran reactivates its axis of resistance by enabling Houthis and the Hezbollahs to attack the civilians and also the oil transportation across the Gulf, the Bay of Gulf, that can simply lead to a huge financial and economic disasters in South Asia.
And now, taking that point further, what role can neutral or regional powers like India, Indonesia, or Malaysia and Sri Lanka play to help de-escalate the situation?
I'm not sure about Sri Lanka's position, to be very honest, but I think when it comes to Indonesia, Malaysia, and India have a much more bigger role to play because India is a partner to BRICS, and now BRICS has gone forward to take Iran into the platform. Right, and New Delhi has been traditionally maintaining a very good closer rapport with the Iranian regime, even since before the Islamic Revolution in 1979. And even if you look at the cultural ties between the two countries, you can see that there is a huge Shia diaspora in India, and also the intelligence gathering, the intelligence sharing between the two countries have been extremely formidable. So in that context, a country like India can simply take part in the global platform to de-escalate this situation. And also if you look at the other Eastern Asian giants like Malaysia and Indonesia can also play a huge role in the process of de-escalating this scenario, which is extremely needed at this hour.
Now, you will stay with us as we are taking a breaking news. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi personally reached out to the President of Iran, urging swift steps to de-escalate the rising tensions. His appeal came just hours after US President Donald Trump announced that American forces had launched successful strikes on 3 of Iran's key nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. These sites have played a central role in advancing Tehran's nuclear ambitions and have long been at the heart of international concerns over Iran's atomic capabilities. Now we're going back to our discussion with Dr. Punsara. Dr. Punsara, what is your reaction for this breaking news, as you have just said that for certain countries in Southeast Asia, it's important for them to stay ambiguous in this situation?
Yeah, I think the strategic ambiguity matters to a certain extent in geopolitical tensions, because when you take sides with one particular country, there can be certain repercussions coming upon you. So that is why strategic ambiguity has been quite a novel approach, especially if you look at mainly the Southeastern Asian countries like Philippines, and also Vietnam. They have been accustomed to adopt strategic ambiguity. But I'm not sure to which extent it can be applicable for a rising power. I would say that emerging power like India to remain strategically ambiguous, because you need to understand that India is playing a key role in global affairs, especially under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Under Narendra Modi, India's role in the global affairs has seen a robust increase. So therefore, a country like India cannot entirely adhere to strategic ambiguity, especially as a key partner to a platform like BRICS. So I think what we can see is that here, we can take certain examples from how India took part in global de-escalations in the Cold War period. How great leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, right, try to thwart the atrocities occurring in countries like Hungary in 1956 or in Czechoslovakia. At that time, India was not even a globally recognized emerging power. It was just a post-colonial state. But still, Nehru took part in the discussions, manipulating, convincing the Soviets to de-escalate. So it can be, the same scenario is quite visible today because we can see that New Delhi is trying its very best to de-escalate this situation. So that was quite evident from the statement made by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi today.
Professor, you will stay with us. Now we have another breaking news. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is heading to Moscow this afternoon for emergency talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin amid soaring tensions in the Middle East. Araghchi announced that Iran is engaging in serious consultations with its strategic partner, reinforcing growing bilateral ties with Russia. The Kremlin confirmed the meeting but said President Putin has no immediate plans to speak with US President Donald Trump, though a call could be arranged quickly if needed. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry has issued a stark warning, saying the risk of full-scale conflict in the Middle East has increased significantly. Moscow called the US strikes on Iran a violation of international law and urged an immediate end to this escalation. Russia is pushing for a return to political and diplomatic channels. Now we're going back with our discussion with Dr. Punsara. Dr. Punsara, how likely is that Russia will now act forward and move forward with this mediator role, according to you?
Well, actually 24 hours prior to the attack launched by the US in Isfahan and Fordow, the Russians withdrew their scientists working in the Iranian nuclear plants. That was quite a decisive move. But I don't think that from a strategic point of view, I don't think that Moscow will directly involve in the regional conflict because it doesn't have potentials to afford it. Because Moscow itself is standing on the brink of a recession and it's been completely exhausted by its war with Ukraine. So therefore at least practically, from a practical point of view, I don't find any avenues opening from Russia to enter the game as a direct partner. But having said that, I must convince there has been a great strategic rapport, a continuity between Tehran and Moscow, and Tehran, Moscow, Beijing. These three, the global powers, the Chinese, Iranians, and Russians, have been overwhelmingly challenging the Western liberal order. They are looking for an alternative global order. So when Russia realizes that Iranian regime is standing on the brink of a collapse, definitely Putin will do its very best to prevent it. Not by sending army, not by sending arms and ammunition, but it will do everything at the United Nations. As you know that Russia has the veto power in the United Nations Security Council. At the same time, Russia has a considerable allies and considerable power in the diplomacy as well. So they would do everything to de-escalate as a mediator on behalf of the Iranian side.
And Dr. Punsara, staying on this, do you see a new security doctrine emerging from this conflict, and is this simply an extension of old tactics and strategy, according to you?
Well, actually, what we are seeing is just the reap of the harvest, right? The fruit, the process was nourished by the Americans for past few decades. That is the realistic scenario. So they were making the division between the Middle East and the West, and they were initially they invaded Iraq in 2003 because they suspected Saddam Hussein was having the mass destruction weapons of mass destruction, but found with nothing. At the end of the day, they wanted to bring democracy to Iraq. But what happened in Iraq was unmitigated disaster. So they invaded Afghanistan, and they kept Afghanistan under American domination for nearly 2 decades. And finally, in 2021, Afghanistan was returned back to the regime it was ruling before the American invasion in 2001. So now even today, if Americans are trying to change the regime, and if America thinks that, even if Israel thinks that end of the Teheranian regime, if the end of the Iranian regime is the answer for all these problems and it will lead to the liberal world order's preservation, Well, actually, they are mistaken. These are not my words. These are the words that I have borrowed from one of the leading American strategists called Edward Luttwak. The Edward Luttwak published an article yesterday for the Uni Herald saying that regime change, right, sending troops to restore democracy or rebuild democracy in the Arab world is not an answer for what West is facing today. So it will simply severe, it will make problem much more severe. And with regard to the question that you raised, my answer is quite simple. I would simply say that this conflict which we are witnessing today is a continuity of the same geopolitical conflict, the same geopolitical entanglement which has encompassed the Middle East for past few decades, precisely speaking, starting from 1979.
And Dr. Punsara, Araghchi has claimed that Iran never left the talks or negotiation table. But what is your take on his claims about Iran never leaving?
I beg your pardon, I did not get your question. Sorry.
So let me repeat it. So my question is that Iran, Foreign Minister Araghchi said he never left the negotiation table, but now a lot of other countries, especially Western power, are asking that Iran has left the negotiation table. What is your take on this?
I think, precisely speaking, the Western countries, in particular Israel and United States of America, expected one thing. They wanted to reduce the uranium enrichment of Iran to the zero level. And Iran had come up with different alternative excuses, alternative theories, arguing that their nuclear program was not for harmful expectation. It was focusing for the peaceful purposes. But that logic was not taken seriously by the West. So that is why the Western countries, mainly Washington, claim that Iran has simply left the negotiation table. And at the same time, there was certain reliable intelligence gathering which affirmed that Iran is very much close to the acquisition of complete military, the nuclear capacity, the nuclear capability. And you must know that nuclear capability, the nuclear capacity cannot be acquired overnight. It takes the dedication and the strength and also expenditure for years and years. So after spending all this, Iran seems to have come to a point of no return. That is why Israel, out of haste, decided to attack Iranian regime, which was followed by the Americans. So from one point of view, actually what Americans are arguing at the moment is quite correct, because Iranians never disclosed the fullest strength of their nuclear capacity to the world. And from the other side, you can see the Iranian foreign minister acknowledges that Iran is still open for the discussion, which means what? Which simply means regardless of the polemics, regardless of the rhetoric comes from Tehran saying that America will face grave consequences, right? Underneath these polemics, there is a way for the diplomacy, because Tehran is quite well aware of its own strategic shortcomings. Tehran knows that it lacks the air superiority. Tehran knows that if it engages in a long-term conflict with United States and Israel, their regime will be doomed. There will be certain uprisings internally. So therefore now they have come up with a counter offer saying that we are still ready for the diplomatic channels.
Dr. Pranararatna, you will stay with us. Now we have a breaking news. Israeli President Isaac Herzog has praised US President Donald Trump for what he called a historic resolution following US's airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Speaking from an impact site in Tel Aviv after Iran's retaliatory missile barrage, Herzog said the action could change the entire trajectory of the Middle East to have a better future. Let's listen in.
Last night, President Donald Trump took a historic resolution, a resolution which can change the entire trajectory of the Middle East to a better future, and also defended and protected Israel and the interests of the United States of America, the national security interests of the United States of America and its allies, to annihilate the Iranian nuclear program. It's a historic resolution. I commend no less President Donald Trump. I commended blessed Prime Minister Netanyahu for their cooperation and for the incredible resolution and activity.
Now we'll go back to our discussion on this topic with Dr. Punsara. Dr. Punsara, do you see Herzog's praise as a diplomatic signal that Israel expects a long-term U.S. military commitment in the region supporting its military actions?
I think because since the day Donald Trump stepped into power, Netanyahu was simply elated because Netanyahu knows that its own government, the Likud party, is in a huge disfavorable position among the Israeli citizens. Therefore, they somehow need to legitimize and justify their war effort. And from one side, they have been stuck in a long, never-ending war in Gaza. Even though Israelis have, the IDF seems to have accomplished all the military objectives by eliminating the top leaders of Hamas, still there is no end goal. There is no end objectivity for the military, the apparatus, Israeli military apparatus in Gaza. In this situation, if America steps into this regional escalation between Israel and Iran, or maybe between Israel and Hamas, that would be a tremendous support for the war machinery of Israel, because Israel is completely gutted by this long-term game. It has not been able to bring back all the remaining hostages. And even imagine if United States is not supporting the military efforts of Israel, Israel lacks the complete capacity to destroy, completely devastate the Iranian nuclear facilities, because I think even in one of my previous interviews to NewsX, I pointed out the fact that although Israel has the air superiority over Iranians, still it cannot penetrate the certain nuclear facilities in Isfahan and Fordow. They can only be penetrated by the B-2s and B-52s of the American Air Force. So that is why finally America entered the game. So and in this situation, so continuity of American presence in the Middle East as protector of the state of Israel is a kind of a blessing for Netanyahu's government to stay in power.
And Professor, you will stay with us. Now we have another breaking news. Turkey has issued a formal warning following US's strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, stating that such actions could escalate the Iran-Israel conflict to a global scale. In a statement released today, the Turkish Foreign Ministry expressed deep concern over the developments, describing the potential outcome as catastrophic. Ankara urged all parties to exercise restraint, emphasizing the need to prevent a wider regional or international conflict and international confrontation. Now we will go back to our discussion on this topic with Dr. Punsara. Dr. Punsara, Turkey has said that the strikes could escalate into a global conflict. And now, given how significant is Turkey's warning, and is Turkey positioning itself as a balancing power or a future mediator in this crisis, according to you?
Well, for the past few years, Ankara's relations with Washington has been absolutely volatile, regardless of Turkey's membership to the NATO, and especially Erdogan has the president has been increasing its capacity and as an isolationist power. And also we can simply see that the statement comes from Ankara saying that this conflict can extend to a global conflict is something which stands beyond reality. It's a kind of an exaggerating remark. I really don't think so. There is a possibility of reaching a global level of a conflict, because probably within few days from now, this conflict is likely to be de-escalated. Because even if you just compare the statement of Iranian foreign minister with what we are witnessing right now, Iran itself has opened the table for the negotiation. And even from the United States, they are well aware of the fact that if they engage in a long-scale war with Iran or in the Middle East, that will simply lead to a rapid economic disintegration global that can undermine the American interest. So we should not think about the statement comes from Ankara as a factual reality.
Now you will stay with us, Professor. We have another breaking news. French President Emmanuel Macron spoke with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the Sultan of Oman to review the escalating situation in the Middle East following the latest strikes on Iran. According to the French presidency also confirmed that Macron will convene a special defense cabinet meeting on Sunday evening to address the escalating crisis. Now we go back to our discussion with Dr. Punsara. President Macron has called a special defense cabinet meeting, and does this signal that Europe is preparing for spillover or potential security threat at home? How significant is that he is calling for this meeting?
I think, at the very outset of this conflict, President Macron and even the British Prime Minister, they were not directly in favor of direct escalation against Iran. They simply wanted to open the channel through the discussion, through the negotiation. But at the same time, none of the countries wanted Iran to possess a nuclear weapon as well. That is kind of a factual reality. So, but we must understand now, after having witnessed what is going on in the Middle East for the past 24 hours since America struck the nuclear facilities in Iran, the French entry to the game is remarkable because it signifies, from one side, you need to understand France is a country with a veto power in the United Nations Security Council, and at the same time, the French too have a tremendous interest in the Middle East, right, for the past few decades. And they maintain quite a good rapport with both Israel. At the same time, they maintain a very good rapport with the other Middle Eastern countries as well. So, but I don't agree with what you're saying, that it is not going to split over the region, or it's not going to drag other countries into the conflict. But on the contrary, what we can see is that maybe Macron, the French, the government, the Paris, wants to de-escalate the situation by dragging the regional actors into the discussion table. Probably for the next few hours, maybe we are likely to see there can be certain the Security Council resolutions emanating from the United Nations.
Thank you, Dr. Punsara, for joining us and bringing your expertise to our conversation today. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.